Deciding where to live in Portugal is one of the hardest decisions that you'll make, but a good starting point is if you narrow it down by region. Because unless you're specifically thinking, hey, I want to move to Lisbon or Porto, or maybe I want to move to a big city, in which case it is Lisbon or Porto, or a small city, in which case you might be looking at Aveiro or Coimbra, you're looking more in terms of area than you are specific towns or cities. A lot of people who look at the Algarve, for example, start off with the region, and then they kind of figure out what they can afford within that region and which town or location works best for them. A lot of people who move to central Portugal, for example, decide that they want to be near a city like Aveiro or Coimbra or maybe Viseu, but then they live in one of the small villages or small towns nearby that they might not have come across looking at these lists of the top 10 or top 50 places to live in Portugal. So I think region is an excellent starting point. And from there, you break it down to sub-region. For example, if you were looking at the Algarve, you might look at the coastal Algarve and then the interior Algarve and compare the two. In fact, the Algarve can also be split into three regions: the eastern, the central, and the western Algarve. Each has its own sort of feel to it. Very good place to start if you're considering where to live there. I will have more videos where I break down each region. So there will be one on the Algarve, one on northern Portugal, one on the Azores, for example. And then I will have videos covering different towns and cities. So there will be one on Coimbra, one on Viseu, one on Porto. But for now, this is the bird's eye view of Portugal, where you can look at all the different regions, figure out who they're best suited to, and decide if it's right for you. Now let's start off with the Algarve, which is probably the most popular region to move to in the whole of Portugal and has been for some time. Now, traditionally speaking, it is mainly been popular with retirees, particularly from places like the UK, Germany, the Netherlands. More recently, from places like the US, Canada, and across the world. However, it has changed a lot in the past 10 years or so. It has become a digital nomad and remote worker hotspot, particularly around Lagos and Portimão, although it is still much, much smaller than somewhere like Lisbon, for example. It's less popular with those that need to work, so there is a big tourism industry here, but often not a lot else. And so people either need to bring their work with them as a remote worker or digital nomad, or they need to be retired, unfortunately, because there aren't a huge number of jobs, at least well-paying jobs in this region. The Algarve is very popular with families, so there are lots of international schools here, as well as private and public schools, and it probably has one of the highest concentration of international schools in the country alongside Lisbon. Those would be the top two areas if you're thinking of that. Now, the big selling point of the Algarve is the weather. You get 300 plus days of sunshine per year. This really makes a difference during the winter months when the days are quite mild. So you might have temperatures of sort of 17, 18 degrees Celsius. To put it mildly, you can stand outside, you can be outside in a t-shirt on Christmas Day and enjoy the good weather, something that you can't do, say, in the north of Portugal or in the rest of the world, generally speaking. Another big selling point is the beaches. The Algarve has more than 100 of them, and they are some of the most beautiful in the world. English is widely spoken here, so it is very international. Still has plenty of Portuguese people living here, but I would say if you're really looking for something that's authentically Portuguese, then this probably isn't the right region for you, although you can still find it here. There is a definite mix of Portuguese culture and international culture, and you will see that with things like the large expat supermarkets, particularly for British people, expat meetups, you name it. Everything is a mixture of expat services and then things for locals. The Algarve has a regional airport, which not all parts of Portugal do, so there are flights to different parts of Europe, but increasingly North America as well. Now, I'd say one of the Biggest downsides of the Algarve is how busy it gets during summer. So it is a tourist region. The region is almost entirely focused on tourism, and the population increases during summer. It can be quite frustrating if you want to go to the beach or even to the supermarket. Another big downside is the heat during summer. So, summers can be very hot, particularly if you are inland rather than on the coast, and they do seem to be getting hotter. It's worth noting that there are different versions of the Algarve, so you may have a preconceived idea of what the Algarve is like. If you are from the UK, you may be thinking of Albufeira. In fact, if you're from anywhere in Europe, you may just sort of think of the Algarve as somewhere you go on vacation. But there are different regions to it. So there are small cities like Faro and Portimão. There's the digital nomad area like Lagos. There is the inland area, areas like Monchique, which is very, very different from the coast. So if you search around, you can find a section of the Algarve that's maybe right for you. There are parts of the Algarve then which have more historical attractions than others. So I wouldn't say this is a part of the country with a lot of historical attractions, but if you are looking for that, consider somewhere like Silvish with its cathedral and castle, or somewhere like Tavira, or Faro, which is the capital of the Algarve. Some people choose to live on the Spanish border or very close to it in somewhere like Villarreal de Santo Antonio. This is perfect. You get the best of both worlds. You can have breakfast in Portugal and lunch in Spain and be back home in Portugal for dinner. And of course, there are places here that are very touristy, places like Albufeira or Praia de Rocha. Some people like this vibe, for others, this is somewhere that they want to stay away from, particularly when they move here, because I think it's very different when you visit Portugal and when you actually move here. Then there are parts that are more modern and sort of in the more luxurious category. So Villamora sort of fits into this with its golf courses and its yachts and everything else. And nearby you have the Golden Triangle area, which is sort of like the Beverly Hills of Portugal, where you have places like Val de Lobo, Quinta do Lago. Lots of big mansions here, private pools, very manicured lawns, that sort of thing. So there are a lot of different places here, and you can even get a different feel for the Algarve by breaking it down into sub-region. The Eastern Algarve has a very different feel to the Central Algarve, which is the busiest and most touristy part of the Algarve. And then the Western Algarve is more rugged, more suited to surfing, more suited to walking, more suited to nature. I will be breaking down the Algarve in more detail in a future video, so watch this space. Now, sorry to interrupt, but I just have to ask, have you been to Portugalist University yet? It is a completely free course that'll teach you how you can move to Portugal. It includes information on visas, including the D7, the digital nomad visa, and the golden visa. It includes guides on where to live, renting property, buying property, schools, healthcare, you name it. Check it out at portugalist.com/university. Now back to the video. Then you have Lisbon. Now, Lisbon is the big city, at least by Portuguese standards. It's certainly no New York or London, but it has all of the amenities that you would want, like international restaurants, co-working spaces, gyms. There's a lot of things going on all the time, whether it's in Portuguese or in English, with things like English stand-up comedy. It's very multicultural. It has a large international airport. In short, this is the closest you will get to the big city vibe in Portugal, while still having all the traditional things that people love about Portugal, those beautiful trams that you have in Lisbon, the tiles, the cobbled streets, all of that. There are obviously markets here too in different parts of the city, so you can buy your produce there. There's no need to own a car here. In fact, parking is a nightmare, and so it's generally not recommended that you have a car inside the city, although you may want one for going for day trips and weekend breaks away. Another downside I would say is that it's just harder to find the old traditional Lisbon that was there 15 years before, let's say. A lot of the traditional tascas, a lot of the traditional Portuguese restaurants and cafes have gone and are going. And in its place, there are hipster coffee shops, Mexican restaurants, places serving matcha, whatever else is popular around the world. It's now in Lisbon. And this can be a really, really good thing because if you live in a part of Portugal where you only have Portuguese things, you do get a little bit bored of it. But it is sad to see what was so great about Portugal gone and being replaced by these things. It would be nice if there was more of a mixture, and you can find these things still. There's just a lot less of them than there were in the past. Another downside is tourism. So, like the Algarve, Lisbon gets a lot of tourists, and this can be particularly frustrating during the summer months. You'll probably want to avoid the main attractions. You may even want to avoid a lot of the city centre because the pavements are quite narrow and they're just packed full of throngs of tourists with their cameras, their selfie sticks, and their suitcases. And it can get quite frustrating if you're trying to live in a city like this. Now, the same is true for Porto, the same is true for other parts of Portugal. It's not just Lisbon. I will say though that even with the high prices, even with the tourism, even with everything else, Lisbon is still unique. It is unique within Europe. You don't really find another capital city where you get such great weather in the winter, and it can be pretty nice and mild in Lisbon, even though it's not right down in the Algarve. You have many things now like co-working spaces that weren't there before, like English stand-up comedy. There's plenty of meetups, ways to meet other expats who have moved there, particularly people who are working remotely or involved in a startup, something like that. So it has a very interesting feel to it. And as well as that, you still have the traditional elements in terms of the beautiful cobbled streets, the beautiful buildings, etc. So even with the high costs, even with the increased number of people moving there, I still think this is a fantastic place to live. Now, a lot of people want to live near Lisbon, but not necessarily in it. And there's a wide range of options here in terms of price, in terms of lifestyle, etc. So, starting with Cascais, Cascais is quite upmarket. It's very upmarket. In fact, it has some of the highest property prices in Portugal. It's also very international. Now it has a small beach, which is perfect if you just want a quick bit of sunbathing, but it's closer to nicer beaches nearby, like Guincho, for example. In 30 to 40 minutes on the train, you can be in Lisbon, less if you drive, depending on the time of day, but it also has its own community, its own feel, and does feel separate to Lisbon. There are plenty of international schools nearby. There's opportunities for yachting. There are tennis clubs, paddle clubs. It's very clean. It's very modern. Some people say it has a little bit of a Californian vibe to it. And with that, it attracts a lot of wealthier retirees and younger families who want to take advantage of the schools. The main downside for all of this would obviously be cost. It is expensive. The next biggest one would be that it is touristy. So there are a lot of tourists here, and there are nice parts of Cascais, particularly for living. But I would say a lot of it can feel like an Algarve resort town with its Irish bars and Indian restaurants and everything else. And it depends what you're looking for, but that vibe is certainly there. Now, you don't have to live in Cascais. I would say if you're considering somewhere like that, look along the train line between Cascais and Lisbon. And you have other places along there like Carcavelos, which is popular with surfers or people who just want to be close to the beach. That's just 20 minutes from Cais de Sodré. And then you also have Oeiras, which is very nice, upmarket, but much quieter area to live in. Each of these places has its own feel, and they're certainly not the only ones on the train line. So if Cascais isn't quite right for you, or you think maybe I'd like to visit it often but not live in it, take a look at the other places along the train line, as all of them are very easy to get into Lisbon. Now, Ericeira is popular with surfers and digital nomads, not exclusively, but this is probably the main sort of type of person it attracts. People in their 20s, 30s, 40s who want to live in a small town, quite an upmarket town that's clean, has pretty much everything you need, but is still close to Lisbon. I would say this is a very nice place to live. Probably the biggest downside, aside from cost, it is quite expensive here. You would think that it would be cheaper, being roughly an hour away from Lisbon, but it's not. It is comparable to Lisbon prices. But I would say the biggest downside is that the public transport here is just okay. So there's no train. There is a bus, but it can take about an hour. Driving is faster. So even though you are quite close to Lisbon, there is public transport, you do feel quite disconnected. So if you're thinking maybe I'll live there, but I'll go in and out to Lisbon a lot, this probably will be harder than you think, especially if you're planning to come in and out late at night. Now, Setúbal is a small city that's about an hour outside of Lisbon. It has good public transport between buses and trains to Lisbon, and it offers a lot of the benefits of a small city. It has plenty of charm within the old town, plenty of character in there, although it can be a bit sort of ugly and industrial in places, particularly on the outside, it is quite built up. One of the big upsides to it is its proximity to nearby beautiful beaches and hiking in the Serra da Rábida, but beware that these beaches can be very busy during summer and parking can be very difficult here. So you might struggle to take advantage of this as much as you want, or at least you have to be up early to get a good parking spot. Another place nearby to Lisbon is Costa de Caparica. It's very popular with those who basically want beach. That's their main priority, and they want to be close to Lisbon. You get miles and miles of beach here. Now, the town itself is okay to look at. It's not the most charming. It has a lot of high-rise blocks of apartments, a lot of cafes and restaurants, but they mainly cater to day trippers from Lisbon, and there isn't a huge amount of traditional character here, but it is a good place to base yourself if your main focus is beach, if it's surfing, and you want to be within a short distance of Lisbon, but you also want to be on the other side of the bridge so that you can easily get down to the Algarve or somewhere like that. I think once you move here, once you live here, you will find your own places and your own community. But initially, it can sort of feel very much like a beach town somewhere for people from Lisbon to go for the day. Now, prices have risen in Costa de Caparica because everybody wants to live near the beach, particularly once remote working became an option. And the beach area, especially around the town, can be very, very crowded. So you do get a lot of people coming from Lisbon during the summer months. Another downside is that if you want to drive into Lisbon, the 25th of April bridge can be very, very busy. It can be hard to get out of Costa de Caparica. Then once you get onto the bridge, it can be very busy. It's very easy to get stuck in traffic there. There is public transport to Lisbon, but the bus services are just okay. They take quite a while longer than you would think, and there isn't a train station in the town. There is one nearby, but you will need to get a bus, a taxi, or drive there in order to take advantage of that. Now, these are just some of the most popular places to live near Lisbon. There are plenty of other options. I'm seeing people live in places like Barreiro, which is just across the water, Loures on the far outskirts, Santarém, which is about an hour by train outside Lisbon. All of these offer a different feel, a different type of character. So I would say sort of draw a circle around Lisbon, decide how far outside you want to be, and then start investigating the different options around there. Now, if you're thinking about northern Portugal and wondering what it's going to be like, the first big selling point I would say is it's more traditional, it's more Portuguese, and it's a lot greener. It's very beautiful. You have places like Gerês National Park, you have the Douro Valley, you have beautiful, rugged northern beaches. This is a little bit more of the real Portugal. It hasn't been so internationalized like places like Lisbon or the Algarve. And you get proximity to northern Spain. So you really get the best of both worlds. You can live in Portugal, but you can cross over the border and go to Spain. Prices are also lower here than they are around Lisbon or the Algarve, and that is definitely a big selling point right now. So what's the downside? The downside is the winters. So winters are very wet and very grey. A lot of people think, how's that possible? It's Portugal. Portugal is just sunny all the time. Not necessarily. People say that you get more rainfall here in winter than you do in the UK. Other downsides is that it is more traditional here, which can be a pro and a con. So people will be more conservative, they will have their own circle of friends, and it'll be harder to break into that and make friends. You will need to speak more Portuguese than you would in somewhere like the Algarve or Lisbon. That can be a selling point because in the Algarve or Lisbon, people will often just speak to you in English, even if you're trying to speak Portuguese. So it is nice to live somewhere and actually get to speak the language. Now, there are fewer international schools, especially outside of Porto, but you do have a lot of what you need in and around the Porto area. So you have good public transport in this area. The cities are quite well connected compared to other parts of the country. There are some jobs in the region. It is known as a part of Portugal where the work gets done. There are public and private schools, plenty of very good ones. There are hospitals here, and there is a very good international airport, not as big as Lisbon, but still very good nonetheless. So if you're looking at northern Portugal, one place where you might begin your search is Porto. So people often choose this if they think Lisbon is too expensive, Lisbon is maybe too international, they're looking for something a little bit more traditional and they land on Porto. Because if you're looking for cities in Portugal, particularly for the big city vibe, there really are only two choices, which are Lisbon and Porto. Other cities like Coimbra, Aveiro, Faro, etc., are much, much smaller. Some would say that Porto is too small. I guess that depends on you and where you're coming from and what you're looking for. But Porto is a very beautiful city. It is smaller, yes, but it is more traditional. It still has a lot of charm and it is less internationalized than Lisbon, although it is very touristy in the summer months. It does have its own expat scene and digital nomad scene, but generally I would say this is much, much smaller than Lisbon, even though it has grown a lot over the past couple of years. In some ways, this can be good because you're more likely to bump into the same people. Lisbon can feel very, very transient, and even though there's a lot of people to meet, a lot going on, it's not necessarily always a good thing. Now, Braga has become incredibly popular over the past few years, particularly with Americans and particularly with Brazilians. It is a very nice city. It's very walkable. It has a lot of historical attractions. It has that charm and culture that people want in a European city, but it's also really well connected to Porto, either by bus or by train. So I feel like you can live here, you can have the small town or small city life, but for anything that you need that's bigger, you can easily get into Porto. That includes for the international airport there. Another place that has grown in popularity is Viana do Castelo. This is popular because it is close to the Spanish border. It's also right on the coast. It's very flat, it's very walkable, it's quaint, it's traditional. Now, it is quiet, so it's maybe more for families or retirees, but it's ideal for those that want proximity to the coast, being close to the Spanish border, but at the same time, reasonably good train and bus connections into Porto. Now, when we get to central Portugal, this area is often split between the coastal area, which is known as the Silver Coast, and the inland part, which is sort of the middle and then anywhere close to the border with Spain. The Silver Coast has been promoted as an affordable version of the Algarve for quite some time. And yes, it is a little bit like that in the sense that it has beaches as well, and the weather is pretty good. Not really as good as the Algarve, but I think that's where the comparison stops. I would say that the Silver Coast area has much more of a Portuguese and traditional feel than the Algarve, even though there are now plenty of expats living here, particularly from the US, Canada, UK, etc. One thing to know about the Silver Coast is the further up you go, the wetter it gets. And it can also be quite foggy on the coast, so keep that in mind when you're deciding where to live. Now, depending where you choose, you may be able to get into Lisbon or Porto fairly easily by train, but note that some places are a little further out of these two places than you would expect. A lot of people choose to live close to Coimbra or close to Aveiro. These are two small cities in the area. So if you only need a small city, somewhere with hospitals, somewhere with big supermarkets, shopping, things like that, then you could focus yourself there. But just note that for airports, you will need to go to either Lisbon or Porto. Another thing to note is that you can be quite limited on things like international schools. So keep that in mind. There are obviously plenty of great public and private schools here, but for international schools, take a look at what is available in the area before settling on anywhere. Now, if you go inland in the central region of Portugal, things start to get a lot more affordable, especially as you go close to the Spanish border. Why? Well, it's hot and it's isolated. A lot of the villages mainly have older people living here, and so there aren't a huge number of jobs here. There aren't a huge number of things to attract people to moving here. But the area is charming, it's very traditional, and property prices are a lot cheaper than the rest of the country. This area has attracted a lot of people looking for a lower cost of living, looking to do things like live off grid, maybe to buy a ruin or at least a property in need of renovation, do it up, and live a more traditional, authentic Portuguese life. And you can do that around places like Castelo Branco, Garda, etc. There are some really beautiful villages here, the Xiste villages. If you look at the villages in the Serra da Estrela, if you look at places like Monsanto, there's a lot of charm, a lot of character in this part of Portugal. It is great for hiking and it is great for walking, although keep in mind that it can get very, very hot in the summertime. Obviously, you're far from the beach, but there are river beaches here, something to be aware of, and maybe something to look out for when you're deciding where to live. Now, one of the downsides of this area is there's always the threat of wildfires. These are an issue every single year, and although they affect other parts of Portugal, you will see them in the Algarve, in the Alentejo, in other parts of Portugal. It does seem like central Portugal does get quite affected, so something to think about if you're moving here. Now, the Alentejo is a very traditional, very authentic, very beautiful part of Portugal. It has some fantastic small villages. It is known for having some of the best food in the country, but it is hot, especially inland and close to the Spanish border. And there aren't a huge number of other expats who have moved here. So if you are looking to be somewhat or completely surrounded by other people from the US or UK, you may not find that here as easily. There are some beautiful small cities here. Places like Évora, for example, is home to some of the most unique and most interesting historical attractions in Portugal. There are elements of Roman architecture here. There is a very interesting cathedral or a chapel made of bones. Nearby Beja often gets overlooked. It is a smaller city, but it has plenty of character. It has a beautiful castle, beautiful streets. But the weather is hot here, particularly in the summertime, and that does mean that you have to spend a lot of time indoors. Thankfully, cafes and restaurants do tend to have air conditioning a little bit more here. And another big upside is that it's close to Spain, so you can hop over the border, although you're not necessarily close to like big cities or anything like that in Spain. You're close to more rural areas there. Now, the Alentejo has limited options for things like international schools, private hospitals. You should factor in where the main hospital near you would be. Obviously, the biggest one is going to be in Évora, but keep all of those things in mind when you're deciding exactly where to live. Now, a lot of people choose to live on the coast instead in the Alentejo because it is cooler there. It is obviously nice to have the beaches. There's some fantastic walking that runs along the Alentejo coastline. However, keep in mind that some of the towns here, places like Villanova de Milfontes, they can be very busy in summer. Mainly Portuguese tourists, but tourists nonetheless. I would say that the Alentejo is quite popular with people who want to live off grid, people who want something more traditional, more authentic. It is quiet, it is remote. Even though there are cities like Evra, they are very, very small. So maybe not for younger people unless you're looking for something quieter, unless you're raising a family here. Now, Madeira is another option. This island is located off the coast of Africa, so not really off the coast of Portugal. It is almost in another part of the world entirely. People like it here because of the year-round mild temperatures, so it never really gets too hot or too cold. It's not to say it doesn't ever get hot or doesn't get cold, but it is more consistent, unlike other parts of the country where it can get very hot and sometimes even very cold or very wet. And there are microclimates around the island, so even if it is sort of grey or wet where you are, you can often drive 20-30 minutes to another part of the island and find a warmer spot. Madeira is very popular with walkers, so it's famous for its levadas. It has dramatic and stunning scenery. It's also popular for those that want to do trail running. There are a lot more digital nomads and remote workers here now, particularly around Funchal, which is the capital, but also around Ponta do Sol, which is famous for being the world's first digital nomad village, which became popular during the pandemic. Now, one issue here I would say is getting in and out. So there are often cancelled flights because landing a plane here is very, very difficult. I've actually flown here and got to just above the airport when the plane turned back, and I'm not the only one I know that that has happened to. So if you're thinking I could live here and then I could easily commute to somewhere or regularly fly to the mainland, maybe think again. It isn't always that easy. There are some international schools, there are some private hospitals, but do keep in mind there aren't going to be as many options as mainland Portugal. And as I mentioned, flying to and from mainland Portugal isn't always easy, though not impossible. You may find it hard to get things delivered. In fact, you almost certainly will. For things that might take a couple of days to come in Portugal, in mainland Portugal, it can take weeks to come to Madeira or the Azores, and some companies won't deliver to here at all. Another big issue is that after a while, people start to get island fever. So it is a big island, but after a while, it can start to feel small. Another downside is the hills. So it is a very, very hilly island. You constantly feel like you're walking uphill. So if you have mobility issues or you feel like you might have mobility issues in the future, that is something to consider. It is also quite built up in places, particularly around Funchal, although there are certainly parts of the island, plenty of parts of the island, where that is not the case. Azores and Madeira both have lower taxes in certain categories than mainland Portugal, so it could be worth it from that point of view. Another downside, unfortunately, I would have to say, is that while the roads are really, really good, there's a lot of new roads there, the rivers are crazy. And this is often on very sort of steep hills, often around corners with very dramatic drops. So it can be a little scary driving there, particularly at first. Now, there are plenty of quiet spots on the island, so you can find your own corner for yourself. But around Funchal, you will find that it is quite touristy, particularly whenever a cruise ship arrives. And the walking trails, you can find ones that are quite quiet, but some of the more popular ones can get quite busy. Now, as well as Madeira, I want to very briefly mention the little island of Porto Santo. It's known for its beautiful 9 kilometers of sandy beaches and its connections to Christopher Columbus. For those that want to escape the rest of the world, this is where to go, as it is definitely quite isolated and has a population of just 5,000 people or so. Not a lot of people move here, but since it's located right next to Madeira, I thought I would mention it as well. Now, the Azores Islands are one of the most beautiful parts of Portugal. Some say they're like Hawaii, some say it's like Iceland, some say it's like Ireland. I think you'll find elements of all of these countries in the Azores in different places. Either way, they are beautiful and they have fantastic walking. They are great for anyone who is really focused on nature. It is a great place to get away from the world, and you certainly feel like you're far away from the world just sitting here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But the downside of that also is that it can feel very remote. So sometimes that feeling can be great, but sometimes it cannot, and you feel very disconnected. There's obviously going to be a smaller international scene here than you would find in mainland Portugal. So getting to know people, that might be harder here. You do have to factor that in. Although on the plus side, there is often big advantages to staying away from the expaty places because it's very easy to end up in an expat bubble. It is less popular than Madeira, possibly due to the weather, which isn't quite as good, particularly in winter. So it's hard to find an international community in all of the places. You will certainly find people living here, but it'll be much smaller. Although there is a strong sort of Portuguese American community here and Portuguese Canadian community here. Some of the people live here now and have moved back from those countries. Some just visit here. This is for historical reasons. A lot of people from the Azores moved to either Canada or America. Now, it can be quite remote, quite small, and that does mean limited services, limited amenities. So once you get away from São Miguel or Terceira, if you start going to smaller islands like Flores, like Santa Maria, definitely Corvo, you will find that the supermarkets are much more limited. They're much smaller. Surprisingly, a limited amount of fruit and vegetables in these. You would think that it would be grown locally, but a lot of things get imported here. The weather is also very temperamental. It is definitely a place where you get four seasons in one day, might even get four seasons in 1 hour. There is high humidity here too, which is a downside for a lot of people for sure. Schooling options are going to be quite limited, especially once you go to the smaller islands. Even hospitals are limited. So there are three islands, São Miguel, Terceira, and Faial, that have hospital options. And São Miguel does also have a brand new private hospital. But for the others, you will find things are limited. Either doctors and dentists and everything else come and visit those islands, or you may have to travel to them. So do keep in mind that you may put yourself on a smaller island, but find you're taking the ferry or even flights to go to the bigger islands or even the mainland for things that you need. Getting things delivered, like I mentioned with Madeira, is hard, so it can take weeks to get things delivered, and that is assuming that the company is willing to deliver to you. Obviously, you can start to get island fever after a while. If this isn't for you, it can feel quite small after a while, even if you're on San Miguel, which is the biggest island. Like Madeira, there are tax benefits to living here, and even though there isn't a huge number of digital nomads and remote workers, I would say that the internet here is very good, a lot better than I was expecting. Same can be said for Madeira. There is no real city here. Ponta Delgada is the biggest one, but it's very, very small. You won't have a huge amount of nightlife here. So if you are looking for something with a little bit more life, this probably isn't for you. It's more of a place to go to escape the world and to enjoy nature. That concludes the roundup of the regions of Portugal, and hopefully you now get a better idea of what you want and don't want out of a place to live in Portugal. I think you'll see now that even though people say, oh, I'm planning to move to Portugal, you really have to narrow it down because Portugal is so different. Like the Azores are so different to the Algarve. Even within a region somewhere like central Portugal, the area in the middle or by the Spanish border is so different to the coast. So you really have to sort of at least narrow it down to an area when you say that you're moving to Portugal. In the next few videos, you will actually find breakdowns of the regions themselves. So if you think, hey, I want to move to central Portugal, you'll be able to watch that video and look at some of the best towns and cities to live there. If you want to see those, be sure to subscribe. So thanks for watching this video, and bye for now.